For more on the story, we can go across to correspondent Noga Tarnopolsky standing by in Jerusalem. Noga, where exactly are the negotiations right now?
The negotiations seem to be in a sort of limbo right now. One of the terms of phase one of this agreement was supposed to see 33 out of around 100 Israeli hostages released, is that stage two would become part, was negotiating for stage two was necessary on day 16 of the 42-day phase one. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu unilaterally scuttled that. He left for Washington about a week ago now, 8 days ago, saying that he himself was going to negotiate in Washington. The Trump team wasn't having it, pressed him to send a negotiating team to Doha. But I can let you know now that not only was that team a very low-level technical team with no authority to negotiate phase two, they're already back in Israel. It appears there was nothing for them to do in Doha. So as things stand right now, it appears that Israel is in breach of phase one by refusing to engage in negotiations for the start of phase two.
Noga, what are people on the ground in Israel saying following the latest release of hostages, which we had over the weekend? This time around, we've seen hostages come out of the enclave in a very emaciated state, didn't we?
Yes, and it's important to mention, while these men who were released were visibly in extremely fragile health and starved, this is not the first indication. Both the Israeli government has received official reports months already ago of the starvation of hostages, and all Israelis were aware that the 6 hostages who were executed were taken out and murdered on August 31st and were found one day later, on September 1st, were found in a severely emaciated condition. Eden Yerushalmi, one of the young women who was murdered then, her body returned to Israel weighing 36 kilos. So this, while the images were shocking, the reality is not new. What's happening in Israel is simply an immense gulf. There is apparently nothing right now connecting between the fear and the anger in the huge majority of the Israeli public, not only families of hostages and not only families of fallen Israeli soldiers, but between all of them, more than 70% of the public and the government that seems itself to be completely indifferent to the fate of these hostages. Prime Minister Netanyahu did not mention the hostages or their condition in his statement at a cabinet meeting yesterday. And many of his ministers have said outright, without even knowing the details, that they will not vote for phase two, which basically will condemn 65 hostages, of whom half are estimated to still be alive, just to remain in tunnels under Gaza.
Noga, over the weekend, a well-known establishment in East Jerusalem, the educational bookshop, was raided and the owners were placed in jail. Why and on what grounds did Israeli officials do this?
Well, this is it appears, I spent all morning in court watching the proceedings. It appears this is part of the Netanyahu government's general efforts to employ the law to frighten or oppress people. We saw yesterday the cabinet meeting that was held by the Israeli government was not held to discuss the hostages' fate at all, but was held to try and scuttle any investigation which the government by law is obliged to handle. What we saw today was fairly shocking. 2 men who are part of a family that owns this legendary, very popular bookshop in Jerusalem, a real institution in the city. We don't even know exactly why the police took them. The police statement made the very serious accusation against them that they support and incite for terror. But when we were in court this morning, the police representative merely said that they're being held under suspicion of violating the public order. So even the charges are unclear. The judge allowed the police to keep these 2 men in jail for another day, but not longer. The police had asked for 8 days. And it is part of an ongoing efforts by the government to shutter the newspaper Haaretz, the Al Jazeera channel, many outlets and now commercial establishment that it deems anathema to its purposes.
Noga, thank you very much for that update. Noga Tarnopolsky reporting there for us from Jerusalem.